If you recall in my last video, I told you we would skip Mueller Brass and go on because we just didn't have enough time in that particular video. But in this video, we will cover it. We left off with this building right here, which used to be the Mueller Brass Company offices. At the time this photograph was taken from Google Maps, the building was for sale. Since then, it's been occupied by a different company. And as we zoom into this doorway today, of course, it looks like this, but at one time it looked like this. This building was only a small part of a much larger complex, nothing like what it is today. You can see from this photograph here, this is an aerial shot showing this office building that we've been looking at. But as we pan back out, you can see how large this complex is. At one time, it was the largest manufacturing plant in Port Huron, and it employed about 5,000 people. So how does a small town like Port Huron attract such a large enterprise? Well, there's a short version of the story, and there's a longer version of the story, and you know me, I like the longer version, so that's the one I'll share with you. The story starts with this man here, Hieronymus Mueller. I know, a very unusual name, but perhaps not in Germany because that's where he was born, wartime Germany in 1832. Hieronymus decided to flee Germany in 1850, and that he soon made his way to the United States. He was not alone. Approximately 1 million Germans made the exodus to America from 1848 to 1858 to escape the repression. The story of Hieronymus Mueller is like the stories of hundreds of thousands of immigrants who were driven to America by the dual forces of opportunity and necessity. The necessity to escape famine, political oppression, religious intolerance, or economic disasters. He made the most of his opportunity and became a quintessential immigrant success, arriving with pennies in his pockets while going on to achieve the American dream. He ended up in the Chicago area where he joined two older brothers who had preceded him. He briefly settled in Freeport, Illinois, where he met and married Frederica Bernhardt, a Prussian immigrant. His brothers advised him that he should strike out on his own with his new family and suggested he pick a good town with a railroad and grow with it. He picked Decatur, Illinois, because there was a junction that had two railroads going through it. Go there and grow up with the town, they said. That was good sound advice in the mid-19th century, as railroads were the driving force of the emerging economy. Hieronymus moved to Decatur in 1857, established his business, and watched the town grow tenfold in the following decade. So what kind of business did Hieronymus start? Was it a brass company? Was it a foundry? No, it was a gun shop. Hieronymus Mueller was good with his hands. He had been trained as a machinist in his native Germany, but he was also good with his mind, an apparent natural talent. He started his business with a small gunsmithing shop, but soon added locksmithing and sewing machine repairs. He had a knack for understanding mechanical devices. This led to his appointment as Decatur's first city plumber in 1871 to oversee the installation of a water distribution system. The following year, he patented his first major invention, the Mueller water tapper, who is, with minor modifications, still the standard for the industry today. He and his sons went on to obtain 501 patents, including water pressure regulators, faucet designs, the first sanitary drinking fountain, a roller skate design, and a bicycle kickstand. In 1892, Hieronymus imported a Benz automobile from Germany and together with his sons began refining it with such features as a reverse gear, water-cooled radiator, newly designed spark plugs, and a make and break distributor, all leading to patents. The best motor vehicle constructed in this country at that time was a Duryea self-propelled wagon, which you see in this photograph. The Mueller Benz and the Duryea cars figured in the first auto races held in the United States. In 1895, the Chicago Times-Herald, inspired by a similar race in France, arranged for automobiles in the Chicago area. The first race occurred on November 2nd of that year, and Mr. Mueller's car won. The second race was scheduled for Thanksgiving 3 weeks later. A week before this race, a foot of snow fell in Chicago, and with removal equipment inadequate for such a heavy fall, most of it was still on the streets on Thanksgiving Day. With a temperature range of 30 to 38, the racing cars battled deep slush most of the way. 6 cars started in the race, but as in the first race, the race was really between the Duryea cars and the Mueller car. The race was on a 53-mile course and took over 10 hours to complete. So it was the type of endurance races when you consider these cars basically only went about 5 miles an hour. I'm telling this story because it involved Oscar Mueller, and like I said previously, that he was instrumental in bringing Mueller Brass to Port Huron. The Mueller car carried 3 men. Oscar Mueller was the driver, Charles King was the umpire, and they had an umpire in every car. And Charles Reed, identified in some as an assistant driver and others as an observer. But anyway, there was 3 in the car. The Duryea car finished first in that race, collecting $2,000 worth of prize money, and the Mueller car finished second, collecting $1,500. Oscar lapsed into unconsciousness about an hour before the end of the race, and King, who was actually the umpire, drove the car across the finish line. The third person in the car, Reed, had collapsed at the end of 35 miles and was transferred to a sleigh. Most assumed Oscar's condition resulted from the strain of the contest, but what really happened in that race was revealed several years later by his wife. He wasn't sick, he was drunk, Mrs. Mueller said. He was never a drinker, he didn't drink anything, but he was so nervous about that race he couldn't eat breakfast. It was cold weather and he didn't have enough clothes, and they got stuck in a snowdrift 50 yards from the starting line. They had to get down and shovel this out and then go on. And when they got stuck in another snowdrift, it was by a saloon. Oscar was complaining about his condition, and some guy said, "I'll fix that." And he went in and got him half a glass of whiskey. Drinking it on an empty stomach put Oscar out of business for the rest of the race. Here we can see Oscar has recovered. He's the one on the right-hand side, and he's sitting with 3 of the race officials in the car. It was certainly an unusual race where the racing cars pulled over for horses as they went by. If they had to be fixed along the way, they pulled into a shop and had it fixed. And of course, if you were cold and stuck in a snowdrift, I guess you could have a glass of whiskey. Mr. Mueller was a Democrat and took a great interest in the political fortunes of President Grover Cleveland. In his 1896 campaign, William Jennings Bryan came to Decatur and was met at the railway station by Mr. Mueller and his horseless carriage. Bryan and his wife were driven to Central Park, where he was to make a speech at the grandstand. The crowd was so great that the car couldn't get through, and Bryan had to speak from Decatur's first automobile. It was Bryan's first ride in an automobile, and they were very appreciative of the opportunity. Oscar Mueller drove the car that day. In this family photograph, you can see Hieronymus sitting on the right there in the chair. His wife is on the left and the daughter between them, and they had 6 sons all standing behind them. The young fellow standing on the far left in the back was Oscar Mueller, and this was the Mueller brother that was responsible for bringing Mueller Brass to Port Huron. Hieronymus Mueller greatly disliked his name, and is reported to have sputtered about it occasionally in conversations with friends. He never permitted his 6 sons and daughter to name a grandson for him, although they produced several and would have liked to name one of them for Grandpa. This was circumvented by Philip, father of the only grandson born. After Hieronymus' death, Philip named his youngest son, born in 1903, Frank Hieronymus Mueller. Hieronymus also had an aversion to neckties, and while he wore a stiff white collar on many occasions, he refused to wear a tie. Hieronymus was a great influence on his children. There are many stories, but I guess the one I enjoy the most is this one. When Hieronymus learned that his son Fred had obtained a job with the late B.Z. Taylor at $10 a week, he did not approve of it. At that time, wage rates in all lines were very low. Hieronymus was no doubt proud that Fred could get that wage when a mere boy, but with him that was not most essential. He said it was too much money to pay a boy and insisted that Mr. Taylor cut the wage to $4 a week. He realized that a boy with $10 of his own money every week would be facing temptations which might prove his ruin. Fred did not like it, but he obeyed. He had been taught to obey. One day in 1900, when experimenting with carburetors using high-test gasoline, Mr. Mueller departed from his usual caution and lighted his pipe. The explosion that resulted instantly set his clothes on fire. He started to run, and the men who had been working nearby chased him. One of them, Billy Simpson, a longtime employee and later a member of the top management of the company, caught him and threw him down, and with the help of others covered him in such a manner as to put out the flames. Simpson is said to have run behind the horse-drawn ambulance to the hospital, crying all the way. The company founder was so badly burnt that he died a week afterward, on March 1st, 1900. This photo shows the Mueller family reunion and dinner that was held in 1932, commemorating the 100th birthday of Hieronymus Mueller and the 75th anniversary of the company in business in Decatur. This was on the south lawn of their lodge overlooking beautiful Lake Decatur. After Hieronymus' death, the Mueller Company continued its success, becoming a leader in the industry. As I was researching this, I found that Oscar was the one brother who quarreled the most with the family and ultimately headed his own business, but he was one of the most able members of the family. He seemed to have both the inventive ability and business skill of his father. The invention of streamlined pipe fittings, now universally used, was attributed to him. He was credited with inventing the prototype of the modern gasoline engine spark plug. Oscar Mueller married Beatrice Wetzel on June 18, 1895, and hey, that's the date I was married, June 18. However, much later, it wasn't 1895, I'm old, but not that old. The Mueller brothers decided to open a sales branch in New York City to get a better eastern distribution of Mueller Company products than had been possible through sending the goods from Decatur. Oscar was put in charge of the New York operation and did very well with it. In this photograph here, you can see Oscar Mueller sitting front and center with his New York salesman. Soon, Oscar was shipping a considerable volume of goods to Canada from the big New York warehouse. By 1912, Oscar had convinced his brothers to build a Canadian factory to meet needs of Mueller customers there, and a site was chosen in Sarnia, Ontario. The same things were manufactured there that were produced in the Decatur plant, and the Canadian business grew steadily. Mueller shifted to munitions manufacturing as the Great War began, or World War I, and would soon employ 1,800 workers toiling around the clock in 3 shifts. By 1916, Mueller's was one of Sarnia's largest industries, and by war's end, the company was making 90% of the brass forging shipped overseas by Canada. Relinquishing his position as head of the Mueller Company sales office in New York City, he moved his family to Port Huron, Michigan, across the St. Clair River from Sarnia. Oscar served as president of Mueller's Canadian Company until he sold his interest in it to the parent firm. In 1917, Oscar induced his brothers to develop another plant in Port Huron to manufacture brass rod for munitions for the Decatur factory in World War I. This operation first was known as Mueller Metals Company, but was later changed to Mueller Brass Company in 1924. Well, it took us a while to get here, but I was so interested in the Mueller story, their history and background, not only Oscar, but his father and brothers. We're not done with Mueller Brass. As a matter of fact, we're just getting started at the Port Huron location. And you join me in my next video. We have some amazing photos of what it looked like shortly after it was built, including the different boundaries and even inside in the kitchens and the pantry and so forth. So join me then.